Okay, good afternoon. Your last class of the day, I guess. Okay, let's make it short, powerful, effective, learning rich, and maybe some fun. Today we conclude week 7, the first part of the Rome 1 regulation, as part of the private international law in the European law line, year 1. And we start with question number 1. What is the difference between the Rome Convention and the regulation? So we start on the first row. What is the first thing? In the name? Different name? That's right.
Year of adoption.
Year of adoption. So the convention is in 1980 and the regulation is?
2008.
Class. Neighbor. So, when I add to the question from a sources of law perspective, what's the difference between a convention and a regulation? Over here. You know, but let's mobilize your knowledge. So, another word for convention is a treaty. So, a treaty is connected to which course in this program? PH, Public International Law. And the regulation is connected to which other course over here? Yes? And from an EU lawyer's perspective, how do we call regulations? Secondary. Okay. What is primary EU law? The treaty. So, treaties are on top. Then you have secondary law from a European perspective. And the regulation is, in the EU perspective, what type of animal?
Well, it applies to all, and its application is equal to all. So the member states have no freedom in the application methods.
Exactly. And then you contrast that, neighbor, with which cousin, which twin instrument that has different characteristics. So the other secondary law tool, other than the regulation. So the twin is directive. You just wanted to say. Slow down, ladies and gentlemen. And the characteristic of a directive is? It's also binding, but something needs to happen with it. What? Which state?
One of the EU states?
Just one of them?
All of them?
All of them. And so directives need to be implemented. So the regulation, from a legal perspective, does not need to be implemented. So all the capitals of the 28 member states get this in the mail with the message, this applies to you in your legal system. Alright. That does not mean, I add to this story, that does not mean that member states may type over the instrument in the legislation they already have. And so the Brussels 1 regulation is typed over in national codes on civil litigation. So that in one source you see all the rules of civil litigation and which court is having jurisdiction. So that you do not have two sources. But just copy-pasting is something different than implementing. So they translate the regulations to local instruments, local acts of parliament, for the convenience of the practitioners in these member states. But it's still regulation. So that is something in practice you have to be aware of. That all those apparent local legislation can be content-wise originally a regulation. Meaning that the local parliament may not touch it. Cannot sort of change the language. So really copy paste. Then the question is, just as a side dish, just for the fun of it, and you really need your law collection today. No, it's connected to question number 2. Let's do first question number 2. What is the scope of the regulation? And then, before we answer that, what types of scope do we distinguish?
Enforcement of
No, that is the question, what are the topics of private international law? So this is the question, when you look at the Rome 1 regulation, what is the scope of this legal instrument? Neighbor. But first tell me a little bit more, what do we mean with scope? What matters it handles? And what else? So the subject matter, gentlemen, before you drown in the text, what do we mean with scope? Say it again? Yeah, boundaries. So which phrases did we develop in the lecture? So what is another word for boundaries? The territory, so the geographical application of this instrument. And what else? Temporal application. So when you talk about the legal instrument, before you are able to use it, you ask yourself, is it a relevant instrument in my territory? Is it in force or not yet or not anymore in terms of time? And does it deal with a subject matter that is on my table? Or is it about aerospace law or about, something else than the issue at hand? Well, what is then the territorial scope of the, what is the territorial scope of the Rome 1 regulation?
So, all EU member states except
All EU member states, except
Denmark.
Denmark. Why? That's correct. Denmark doesn't want to. Okay. And then, if you have to phrase it a little bit more lawyerish, neighbor.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. Neighbor. I come back to you. Don't do that to me. Yes.
refuses to sign the regulation.
Yeah. So is it not signing the regulation? So think of the ordinary legislative procedure. Is it a matter that all the member states should sign? No. So how come that Denmark is not... Yes, say it again? Special agreement? With who? With the EU. That all future regulations and directives are only applicable to the territory of Denmark if they want. So all new ones. So the old ones are still applicable. So in primary law, they reserve the sort of special treatment seat. And that has an effect on secondary law. So it's not that all the member states have to sign, so that after that in the decision-making process there's a sort of table, and that all the member states are going to the table and sign off, and at the end you look how many signatures you have. No, that is not how it works. Only Denmark, and which other country has that special seat? UK. And then you need to dive into the history of a legal instrument, in this case the regulation, to check, did the UK raise the finger and said, I want to join? And they did. I told you. It's a sort of thing you have to memorize or make it known. Okay, so that's the territorial. And then, neighbor, we move to the temporal scope. So what is the temporal scope of this instrument?
It is defined in Article 28, says application in time. That the regulations shall apply to contracts concluded after 17 December 2009.
Okay, so the instrument is explicit on one thing, that it intends to be applicable after a certain date. But before you get there, what needs to be happening? What needs to happen? Before you get there?
Yes, sir.
To the 17th of December 2009. Say it again. Exactly. The instrument should enter into force, otherwise no one cares about Article 29. There are many Articles 29 on the globe, but only those who entered into force. That's sort of but this is what your legal brain should do prior to embracing an R. Because if you take an R in Iraq and solve a case with an R that is not an R, but just a dream, then you're not a lawyer, but a sort of wizard. And then your client doesn't pay your bill. And so that's sort of critical. Well, when did this animal enter into force? Do you have electronic devices? Slow. Mamma mia. Neighbor? Is that entering into force? So which article says something on entering into force? Come to you. I give you 10 seconds, all of you. 9, 8, 7, 6, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2. Yeah, difficult. 2, 1. Yes, sir. Time is up. 29, stating?
This regulation shall enter into force on the 20 days following its publication in the official journal of the European.
Exactly. A proper modern legal instrument has at least a clause on when it enters into force. So when you're a legislator, please do me a favor and include such a clause. And a clause on the territorial and subject matter applicability. So before you start writing, you already have 4 clauses. That makes your boss happy. Well, 20th day after the official publication. So, next row, sir, over there. Over there, can you push in? Yes? So when was that? Why? Okay, so reread 28. 20th day after what? So this is the moment that you lose points because you make a logical thinking mistake, reading mistake. And that's why we have skills 4, so that you are rooted in logic. So it says 20 days after the day below, or 20 days after? What does it say? 28 once more. Okay, the whole idea is that you open your log collection on the right page, you keep it open on the page, and you take all your coloring devices. Those are your weapons to solve the world. And trust your own log collection. So once more. 28%. So, someone should publish this thing in the official journal, otherwise everything goes wrong. Well, when was that date? This is a nice puzzling question. Nine, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. When was it published? All right. And the solution is on the first page. Because there it says 4th of July. And how do you know this is official publication? It says official journal with a date. So on the first page, you see the official journal, first page, the date. So, the date was? And in plain language, that is? 4th of July, 2008. So when did it enter into force, sir? No. So 20 days after the 4th of July. You know the movie? Oh, the 24th of July. 20 or 2008. And then you move to the next paragraph. 17th of December 2000. So all the European citizens were allowed between the 24th of July till the 17th of December 2009, God knows why they choose that day, to make contracts that were not covered by this regulation. And only the new contracts after that day, 18 months later, are covered from or under the temporal scope of this legal instrument. This is not rocket science, it's sort of to warm up. Alright? A little puzzling. But this is sometimes the debate you have during office lunch. And then when you have a contract in January 2009. And you ask yourself, the thing is in force, but not December, and is it still covered, yes or no? These type of discussions. Then, yes.
How come it is in force but not applicable?
The question is, it is in force and not applicable. But it has to do with the idea of secondary legislation that you allow the member states to get used to it. So the better example are all those directives, where it says, please take the following 3 years to implement this in your legal system. And then there's a sort of crucial date, and after that you have state liability, and something similar they do with regulation. So we acknowledge, we, EU, that it is directly applicable, but I give you some more months to get used to the idea. Because maybe there are legal systems that get sort of stressed because of this, you know? For instance, that you can send lawyers to courses on the new regime, like this, and so forth. And so, practical implementation reasons. And then someone, I had to check that, what the story is, but someone said 17th of December 2009. Probably the birthday of someone. I don't know. So, to summarize over here, what are the three main aspects of the scope of a regulation, or legal instrument in general? Temporal, subject matter, and territorial. Remember that in all the other situations too. Question 3. Sir, how in the instrument is the applicable law determined? So how does this instrument help you to solve the question, what is the applicable law on my contract? Because that's the question. Sometimes in discussing entering into force, you forget which problem did we solve. We solve the problem of which law applies on my transnational contract. Sir?
So it depends on the contract, whether they have specified there any kind of jurisdiction or not.
Okay. And so it depends. And what is then the sort of strategy, sort of salami technique type of approach? A step-by-step approach? So what are the 3, 4, 5, 6 steps that are enshrined in this regulation? So what is the first thing you look at?
So there's a conflict of laws.
No. This is an interesting one. So in solving a case, you could investigate all the potential laws on the globe, and then say, well, they do not differ, so it doesn't matter to choose. But that's very impractical, because which laws are you investigating to come to the conclusion that they do not conflict, so that there's no need to choose? When did we choose, or when do we have to choose? One of the famous examples is the statute of limitation, that your claim is time barred. It's too long ago that the judge doesn't want to listen to you. And those moments differ from country to country. So one country you have 2 years time to go to court, and others 5 years, and then you are forced to choose. And then the choice matters. Because in one country you're there, in the other country you win. That is why we choose. So it would be easy if we know all the laws by heart, then we don't have to choose. But that is not the case. So, we first choose and then investigate the law, and then, sure, if then ultimately the answer would be the same in both countries, then bad luck of the work done. Yes?
So we look whether they have chosen.
Step 1, whether they have chosen. Your authority for that claim is
Article 3, freedom of choice.
exactly lex voluntatis. Well, neighbor. It's a sort of marathon question, this one. So what's then the next trick?
The next check is after, so if there is no choice.
So if there is no
There
choice,
is no choice to make. If it's there
and still please continue reading. That's sort of the message of the instrument. There are more goodies in it. Yeah?
and we go to Article 4, which actually contains the new steps. This is the improvement of the convention.
Exactly.
And part of Article 4.
And so the improvement compared to the convention is that in Article 4 you get a basket full of quick and dirty rules giving you the answer. So step 1, choose. If not, check whether you can have the quick and dirty answers. Then neighbor. What then? What sort of important aspects after the quick and dirty rules? Five, 6, 7, 8. What do they have in common? The material scope is with contracts, so indeed, all those things deal with contracts.